It was just another evening. The sun had set hours ago, leaving the streets quiet and the city bathed in soft streetlights. The air was cool, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic and the occasional sound of a car passing by. She had finished a long day at work, her mind still replaying the conversations, the meetings, and the endless tasks that had kept her busy. All she wanted was to get home, relax, and finally let the weight of the day lift from her shoulders. Her car glided down the empty road, tires whispering against the pavement. She adjusted the rearview mirror for the 100th time, more out of habit than necessity, and made sure her seatbelt was snug. She had done this drive countless times, taking the same route, following the same traffic signals. The familiarity was comforting, almost like a rhythm she had memorized. Yet, there was always that tiny part of her mind that stayed alert, the part that had been trained to notice subtle details, to be cautious, to be aware. Without warning, a sharp flash of red and blue lights appeared behind her. At first, she thought it might be a car with emergency lights, but then the realization hit. She was being pulled over. Her stomach tightened, a knot forming as anxiety began to creep in. She slowly brought her car to the side of the road, signaling as she did so, and then came to a gentle stop. She exhaled, trying to calm herself. Pulling over to a police vehicle was always tense, even on ordinary nights. She had been through stops before, and she knew how quickly a simple interaction could spiral out of control if not handled carefully. The silence inside her car felt heavy. The hum of the engine seemed louder now, echoing the rapid beat of her heart. She reached for her license and registration, keeping her movements deliberate and visible. She wanted to make it clear that she was cooperating fully. She knew how important it was to avoid any misunderstanding, especially at a moment like this. She also reminded herself to stay calm, to speak clearly, and not to let fear take over. 2 officers stepped out of their vehicle and walked toward her car. Their expressions were serious, professional, and unreadable. She lowered her window slowly and offered a polite greeting, her voice steady despite the nervous energy running through her. One officer asked for her license and registration, while the other stayed slightly back, observing quietly. She handed over the documents, keeping her hands visible on the steering wheel for safety. As she waited, she noticed the way they moved, the way they positioned themselves. Her training kicked in without her even thinking about it. Not the physical part, but the mental preparation. She had spent months learning to remain calm, to read situations, to anticipate reactions without panicking. It wasn't about being confrontational. It was about protecting herself and making sure that she had control over her own actions. She reminded herself to breathe, to stay polite, and to answer questions without giving extra information that might be misinterpreted. The first officer glanced at her documents, his eyes scanning the information quickly. He asked her the usual questions about where she was coming from and where she was headed. She answered calmly, clearly, without rushing. The second officer stepped closer, asking her to step out of the car. Her heart skipped a beat. She had anticipated routine questions and polite exchanges, but this was different. She wanted clarification. She asked politely why she needed to exit the vehicle. The officer repeated his request, a little more firmly this time. She could feel the tension rising, but she reminded herself to stay composed. She opened the door slowly, keeping her hands visible. The night air was cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the rapid warmth spreading from her chest to her face. She stepped out carefully, positioning herself exactly where she had learned in her self-defense classes. One foot slightly behind the other, hands where they could be seen, body relaxed but ready. She had learned that posture could communicate calm confidence, which often helped de-escalate tense situations. She didn't want confrontation, but she knew that being mentally prepared was crucial. The officer reached for her, signaling that he would guide her to the side of the car. She followed the instructions carefully, noting every movement, every word, every tone. The city was quiet around them, streetlights casting long shadows on the asphalt. She could feel the eyes of distant pedestrians and passing drivers on them, though no one came closer. She focused on the present, on the interaction, on maintaining control of her own reactions. Inside, her mind replayed scenarios she had prepared for in training. She had thought through these moments countless times. What if they got aggressive? What if they misinterpreted a movement? What if someone escalated the situation? Each possible outcome had a response mapped out, and she relied on that knowledge now. Her goal wasn't to prove anything or to intimidate. It was to protect herself and to ensure that the interaction ended safely. The officers exchanged a few words quietly, then returned their attention to her. She kept her voice steady as she answered their questions, her body language calm. She could feel her heartbeat slowing as she reminded herself that she had the knowledge, the preparation, and the ability to handle the situation. Fear was present, yes, but it was balanced with a clear sense of purpose and self-awareness. Minutes passed, though it felt longer. Each moment was a careful dance of communication, observation, and patience. She noticed details, the way one officer's hand rested near his belt, the subtle tension in their shoulders, the slight nods exchanged between them. She stayed focused, aware that small actions and small words could make a big difference. She kept her voice polite, her words precise, and her body posture non-threatening but confident. Eventually, one officer stepped back slightly, and the tension in the air seemed to ease, though she remained vigilant. She understood that these moments could turn quickly, and she was committed to staying mentally sharp until the interaction was fully resolved. She reminded herself of the importance of remaining calm, respectful, and fully aware, knowing that her training was not just about defense but about communication and presence of mind. As the interaction continued, she reflected on how ordinary evenings could suddenly become extraordinary, demanding awareness and preparation she had hoped never to need. She thought about how quickly life could change and how vital it was to be ready, not just physically but mentally and emotionally. Her training, her awareness, and her calmness were her tools, and she relied on them completely. Each instruction she followed, each word she spoke, and each movement she made was deliberate and intentional. Though the situation was stressful, she felt a quiet sense of confidence. She had anticipated such moments and had prepared herself thoroughly. She knew that maintaining composure, respecting authority, and asserting her presence safely could make all the difference. And so, she stood there, hands visible, posture calm, ready to navigate the encounter with careful awareness, knowing that the outcome depended as much on her preparation as on anyone else's actions. The night continued quietly, the city lights casting their glow on the tense but controlled scene, a moment that would soon be remembered, not for fear, but for courage, awareness, and self-possession. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts as the officer continued to speak. Each word, each gesture, seemed measured, but there was an intensity in the air that made her pulse quicken. She kept her hands where they could be clearly seen, resting gently on the sides of her body, and focused on keeping her voice calm and even. She reminded herself that staying composed was her best tool right now, more important than any argument or explanation she could give. The officer's voice was firm, but not angry, as he repeated the request for her to step away from the car. She asked again, politely but firmly, why it was necessary. There was a brief pause, a moment where she could almost hear the quiet of the night stretching between them. Then, finally, he explained in clipped words, a routine traffic stop and a check on her vehicle. She nodded, showing she understood, but internally she analyzed every movement, every inflection in his voice. Her mind stayed sharp, noting details that most people might overlook. The position of his feet, the way he held his hands, the subtle glances exchanged between the two officers. As she stepped further away from the car, the cool night air brushing against her skin, she kept her posture steady. She felt the tension in her shoulders, but she refused to let it control her. She had trained for moments like this, and she drew on that preparation now, focusing on her breathing, keeping it slow and deliberate. Her mind replayed the instructions she had learned. Remain calm, remain polite, always keep your hands visible, maintain eye contact, and speak clearly without rushing. One of the officers gestured toward the side of the road, a request to move a few steps away from the vehicle. She complied, each movement controlled and deliberate. She noticed the way he spoke to her, the slight softening in his tone as he gave instructions, and she adjusted her stance to appear cooperative but confident. Every motion, every word was carefully considered. She didn't want to escalate the situation, but she wanted to make it clear that she was aware, capable, and composed. The night seemed to stretch longer as the officers continued to question her. Their questions were straightforward. Where she had been, where she was going, whether she had seen any unusual activity. She answered each question calmly, clearly, and without hesitation. She avoided extra words that might confuse or frustrate the officers, sticking strictly to the facts. Her voice remained steady, her tone polite but firm. She realized that her ability to stay composed was influencing the officers' reactions, making the encounter smoother than it might have been otherwise. Despite the routine nature of the questions, she felt the weight of the situation. Even a small mistake, a sudden movement, or an unintentional word could escalate the moment. She reminded herself of the importance of presence, of staying fully engaged with the conversation, of keeping her senses alert. She observed their body language carefully. The way one officer's shoulders tensed, the way the other officer's hand moved slightly toward his belt. These were small signals, but in her training she had learned to notice these subtle cues, and she used that awareness now. As the minutes passed, she felt a strange mix of anxiety and calm. The anxiety came from the unpredictability of the encounter, the fact that it could take a turn at any moment. The calm came from her preparation, her awareness, and the confidence that she could handle the situation. She had learned that in moments like these, fear alone was not useful. What mattered was clarity, focus, and the ability to act with intention. The first officer glanced at her again, flipping through her documents with practiced efficiency. She watched him, noticing how quickly his eyes scanned the information, how his hand moved over the papers. She kept her voice soft and steady as she responded to his occasional questions, giving just enough information to answer clearly without adding unnecessary details. Every word, every pause was intentional. She had learned that careful communication could prevent misunderstandings and diffuse tension before it grew. She felt the tension ease slightly when the officers began to discuss something quietly between themselves. She stayed alert, of course, but she recognized the small shift. The conversation seemed to be leaning toward a routine conclusion rather than an escalation. She reminded herself that while the immediate stress might be lessening, she could not afford to relax completely. She maintained her posture, her eye contact, and her calm breathing. At one point, the second officer stepped a little closer, asking her a specific question about her travel that night. She answered politely, explaining briefly where she had been and why she was returning home. Her tone was calm, her words clear. She noticed the subtle nods of acknowledgement from the officers, small signs that her composure was being noted and respected. She realized that staying calm not only protected her safety, but also shaped the way the officers interacted with her. The night air felt cooler now, brushing against her skin, and she felt the tension in her muscles slowly shift. She reminded herself of the importance of mental preparation, of staying aware of both her surroundings and her internal state. She kept her hands visible, her movements deliberate, and her voice calm. She observed the surrounding streets, noting the positions of parked cars and the distance of any passersby. Awareness, she had learned, was both protective and empowering. Suddenly, there was a brief movement from the first officer, a signal to the second, and she realized that the interaction was reaching its next stage. She took a careful step back, positioning herself exactly as she had been taught. Alert, confident, cooperative. She had learned that how she carried herself in these moments could affect the outcome as much as her words. Calm, controlled presence was often the difference between escalation and resolution. As the officers continued their discussion, she reflected quietly on the importance of preparation. Life could present unexpected challenges at any moment. Being ready didn't just mean knowing what to do physically. It meant being aware, staying calm, and understanding how to communicate effectively under pressure. Her training had given her those skills, and she drew on them now, feeling a growing sense of quiet confidence amid the uncertainty. The encounter felt like it lasted longer than it did, each minute stretching with careful attention and deliberate action. She stayed present, aware of every movement, every glance, every word exchanged. She realized that her calm demeanor was influencing the officers as well. They were interacting with her differently than they might have with someone visibly panicked or defensive. She recognized the power of presence, of being fully engaged and prepared without aggression. Finally, the officers finished reviewing her documents and asked a few final clarifying questions. She answered with the same calm clarity, keeping her posture confident and her hands visible. She could feel the tension in the night beginning to ease, the situation moving toward a resolution. She reminded herself to remain cautious, aware, and fully present until the interaction was completely over. Through it all, she maintained a balance of respect and assertiveness, of calmness and awareness. She had learned that these qualities could protect her more than anything else in situations that were tense and unpredictable. As the encounter slowly reached its conclusion, she felt a quiet sense of empowerment. She had faced a difficult, stressful moment with awareness, preparation, and calm determination. The night continued around her, the streetlights casting long shadows, but she walked away with a sense of strength, a knowledge that she had handled the situation with skill and composure, ready for whatever came next. The air between her and the officers was tense but calm, a strange balance that demanded her full attention. Every movement mattered, every glance could change the dynamic. She felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, not panic, but focus. She had learned to recognize that feeling, to use it as clarity rather than fear. Her training had taught her that the mind could be a shield as powerful as any physical technique. It was now her greatest asset. As the officers continued their questioning, she noticed the subtle shifts in their demeanor. There was no hostility, but there was authority, and that was enough to make the situation serious. She understood that her words, her posture, her calm breathing, all contributed to the way the encounter unfolded. She spoke clearly, answered with precision, and kept her body language open but confident. Each time she did, she noticed a slight change in the officer's behavior, a little more patience, a little more attentiveness. She realized the power of controlled presence, of being fully aware of herself while respecting the roles of others. She knew that at some point, she would need to explain herself more clearly. She had been trained for situations like this, not for confrontation but for protection, for maintaining safety, for making sure that no moment escalated unnecessarily. She had invested time, energy, and commitment into understanding not just physical self-defense, but mental awareness and situational control. It wasn't about aggression, it was about preparation. It was about knowing how to respond calmly and effectively under stress. Finally, one of the officers asked a question that gave her the opening she had been waiting for. It was about why she seemed so composed, so in control. She took a slow breath and chose her words carefully, keeping her tone calm and steady. She explained that she had spent time learning how to respond to difficult or potentially dangerous situations. She clarified that her training was about self-protection, about being aware of her surroundings, about keeping herself safe while avoiding unnecessary conflict. She emphasized that it was not about challenging authority, but about being prepared to act thoughtfully in moments of uncertainty. The officers listened, their expressions unreadable but attentive. She continued, describing how her training had given her tools to remain calm, to communicate effectively, and to assess risk in real time. She spoke of the importance of maintaining mental clarity, of controlling her own reactions rather than letting fear dictate her behavior. Her words were deliberate, and she could feel the subtle shift in the air. The tension did not vanish, but it transformed. It became mutual understanding rather than uncertainty. She noticed the officers glancing at each other, a quiet conversation without words, and she realized that her explanation had given them pause. Her calm, composed presence had conveyed more than words could alone. She had learned that authority figures often respond to clarity, confidence, and respect, and she had practiced how to convey that. It was not arrogance, it was awareness. She had spent countless hours rehearsing, not for confrontation, but for moments exactly like this. Her mind briefly flashed back to the training sessions that had prepared her. There were hours spent learning how to stand, how to position herself, how to keep her hands visible, how to speak calmly under pressure. She remembered the instructors emphasizing that self-defense started in the mind, with confidence, awareness, and control. Physical skill was important, yes, but it was useless without mental readiness. She had internalized those lessons, and they were guiding her now. She noticed a small change in the way one officer held himself, a slight relaxation in his shoulders, a softer tone in his voice. It was subtle, but it was there. She recognized it immediately as a positive response, a sign that her explanation and demeanor were being registered. She felt a quiet sense of validation, not from the officers themselves, but from knowing that her preparation was effective, that her awareness was influencing the outcome. It was proof that the hours she had invested in learning self-protection were meaningful. The other officer spoke briefly, asking a few clarifying questions about her training. She explained that it was a combination of physical exercises, situational awareness, and mental preparation. She described how it taught her to assess danger, maintain composure, and respond appropriately. She emphasized that the goal was always to prevent harm, to communicate effectively, and to ensure safety for herself and others. She kept her voice calm, steady, and unhurried, allowing her words to be received without defensiveness. The night seemed to grow quieter, the distant sounds of traffic fading as her focus remained on the officers and the moment at hand. She was fully aware of the potential outcomes, and she remained prepared for any sudden change. But for the first time in the encounter, she felt a growing sense of calm confidence. Her words had been heard, her presence acknowledged, and the dynamic was beginning to shift in a more controlled and respectful direction. She recognized the power of preparedness, of training, and of maintaining composure in moments that could otherwise feel overwhelming. She continued to communicate calmly and clearly, reinforcing the message that her training was about self-protection, situational awareness, and responsible behavior. She described how it had prepared her to handle stressful encounters, emphasizing that remaining composed and respectful was always her priority. Her voice carried a quiet strength, and she could see the subtle acknowledgement in the officer's expressions. It was a moment of connection without confrontation, understanding without conflict. The officers seemed to absorb her explanation, the air between them less charged, more neutral. She stayed fully alert, aware of every movement, but she also allowed herself to notice the gradual easing of tension. It was a delicate balance, maintaining vigilance while acknowledging the shift toward resolution. She reminded herself that true preparedness was not about fear or aggression, but about clarity, control, and thoughtful action. She reflected briefly on how rare it was to find oneself in situations that demanded such focus and composure. Most of life's challenges did not require this level of awareness, yet moments like these highlighted the importance of being prepared. Her training had given her the tools to navigate the encounter safely, to communicate effectively, and to maintain her dignity under pressure. She felt a quiet pride in her own preparedness, knowing that it had shaped the outcome of the situation. As the conversation continued, she remained calm, measured, and fully present. She answered the officer's questions, kept her body language non-threatening but confident, and maintained a steady, respectful tone. Her mind stayed alert, noting details, observing behaviors, and anticipating potential shifts. Each interaction, each response was informed by her training and experience. She understood that preparation was not about controlling others, but about controlling her own actions and reactions. Eventually, the officers began to signal that the interaction was moving toward its conclusion. She stayed alert, aware that nothing could be taken for granted, but she could feel that her explanation and calm demeanor had had the desired effect. The tension had shifted, the dynamic had changed, and she had maintained her composure throughout. Her training, her awareness, and her clear communication had guided her through a challenging moment with skill and poise. She took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the subtle release of tension in her body. The night remained quiet around them, the streetlights casting soft shadows across the pavement. She stayed fully aware of her surroundings, but she also allowed herself to notice the small sense of accomplishment. She had demonstrated, through words, presence, and calmness, why her training was valuable and necessary. She had turned a tense encounter into a situation where understanding and respect prevailed over fear or conflict. As the officers prepared to wrap up the stop, she reflected on the lessons reinforced by the experience. Preparation, awareness, and composure were powerful tools. Calm communication could influence outcomes more than force or argument. Mental readiness was as important as physical skill. She carried these lessons with her as she returned to her car, knowing that she had navigated a potentially stressful encounter with intelligence, self-awareness, and courage. The night air felt less heavy now, and she felt a quiet sense of empowerment, fully aware of her own strength and the value of being prepared for whatever life might present next. The tension in the night began to lift slowly, like a heavy fog starting to dissipate under the first light of dawn. She felt the subtle shift immediately. The officers' movements were less rigid, their tone less sharp. It didn't mean the encounter was over, and it didn't mean she could relax entirely, but it did indicate that her calm presence and clear communication were having an effect. She kept her posture steady, hands visible, and eyes focused, fully aware that the situation could change in an instant. Her training had taught her that awareness and preparation must never be abandoned, even when things seemed to ease. As they continued their discussion, she noticed the small, humanizing details that often go unseen in tense situations. One officer shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing at the rearview mirror of her car. The other adjusted his jacket slightly, a minor movement that reflected an attempt at comfort in an uncomfortable moment. She observed without judgment, understanding that authority figures were human too, subject to stress and uncertainty. Her awareness of these subtleties allowed her to respond with empathy and patience, softening the edge of the encounter without compromising her own safety. She began to feel a quiet sense of control returning, not over the officers, but over herself and her response to the situation. The cool night air filled her lungs, helping her maintain steady breathing. She could feel the tension in her muscles easing, but she stayed alert, knowing that true calm does not come from relaxing alone. It comes from maintaining focus, clarity, and deliberate action. Each small movement, each word spoken carefully, reinforced her presence and her ability to navigate the encounter safely. The first officer asked a few routine follow-up questions, confirming the details she had already provided. She answered calmly, giving precise information without over-explaining. She noticed the way they listened, nodding slightly, acknowledging her clarity and composure. It was a reminder that communication was as much about listening as it was about speaking. She realized that her own calm and careful approach was influencing the officers' reactions, creating a space for mutual understanding rather than conflict. She reflected on the importance of preparation in moments like these. Her training had not only taught her physical self-defense techniques but also mental strategies to remain composed under stress. She had learned to assess the situation continuously, to read the subtle cues of others, and to adjust her own behavior accordingly. This mental readiness, she realized, was just as crucial as any physical skill. It allowed her to respond thoughtfully, avoid unnecessary escalation, and maintain a sense of agency in a situation that could easily feel overwhelming. The second officer spoke quietly to the first, their words low enough that she could not hear them clearly. She maintained her focus, aware of the possibility of sudden changes, but she also recognized the small reassurance in their measured discussion. They were considering the encounter, processing her presence and demeanor, and she understood that their perception of her composure was shaping the way they interacted with her. Her preparation, patience, and awareness were making a tangible difference. She thought about how easily situations can escalate when fear or misunderstanding takes over. Many people in her position might have reacted impulsively, with panic or defensiveness, which could have intensified the encounter. She had spent months preparing for moments like this, learning to control her own emotions, remain polite yet assertive, and communicate effectively even under pressure. She felt a sense of gratitude for that preparation, knowing it had allowed her to navigate the encounter safely and with dignity. The night air was filled with subtle sounds, distant cars, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional hum of a passing train. These background noises grounded her, reminding her that the world continued beyond this tense moment. She drew on that sense of grounding, keeping herself anchored in reality, fully present and aware. Her awareness was not just about vigilance. It was about understanding the environment, staying connected to the present, and using that connection to maintain calm and control. She noticed a small shift in the officer's expressions, a flicker of understanding and acknowledgement. It was subtle but meaningful, evidence that her calm composure and clear communication were being recognized. She realized that patience, presence, and preparedness were as powerful as any physical skill she possessed. The encounter was no longer just a test of her nerves. It had become an example of how awareness, communication, and calmness can influence others and create a safer environment for everyone involved. Her thoughts briefly drifted to the lessons she wanted to carry forward from this experience. Preparation mattered, not just physical readiness but mental clarity, emotional control, and situational awareness. Remaining calm and composed could prevent conflict, reduce misunderstanding, and protect herself and others. She had practiced these lessons repeatedly, and now she saw their real-world value in action. The sense of empowerment that came from applying her training in a live scenario was profound, and she felt a quiet pride in her ability to remain composed under pressure. The officers began to indicate that the stop was nearing its conclusion. They were polite but firm, signaling that routine questions and checks were wrapping up. She maintained her posture, hands visible, voice calm, and eyes focused. She knew that even as the encounter ended, staying alert and respectful was crucial. The final moments could still hold surprises, and her training emphasized that the conclusion of an encounter required the same awareness as its beginning. She reflected on the value of self-awareness and preparedness beyond this single encounter. Life often presents unexpected challenges, and having the tools to navigate them safely and confidently is empowering. She understood that her training, patience, and composure were not just about dealing with authority figures. They were about cultivating resilience, confidence, and thoughtful action in every aspect of life. Each lesson learned, each skill honed, contributed to a greater sense of security and self-assurance. As the officers began to step back, signaling that she could return to her vehicle, she felt a sense of relief mingled with accomplishment. Relief that the immediate tension was easing, and accomplishment that she had navigated the encounter with composure, awareness, and clarity. Her training, her focus, and her deliberate actions had guided her through a potentially tense situation without escalation. She had demonstrated the power of preparedness and the importance of maintaining calm, even in moments of uncertainty. She took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the night air fill her lungs and the weight of the tense moment begin to lift. Her posture remained confident, her hands visible, her mind alert. She understood that the lessons from this encounter would stay with her, reinforcing the importance of calm communication, situational awareness, and mental preparedness. She had faced a challenging moment and emerged with dignity, self-awareness, and a stronger sense of confidence. The officers returned her documents and gave a brief explanation about the reason for the stop. She listened attentively, acknowledged their instructions politely, and responded with clarity. The interaction concluded smoothly, a testament to the power of calm presence, deliberate action, and thoughtful communication. She felt a quiet sense of empowerment, knowing that her preparation and awareness had made the difference. As she returned to her vehicle, she reflected on the broader lessons of the night. Encounters with authority, unexpected challenges, or tense situations are part of life, but preparation, awareness, and composure can shape the outcome. Her training had taught her to stay calm, communicate clearly, and maintain confidence, and applying those lessons in real life had validated their importance. She started the engine, feeling a sense of gratitude for her preparedness and the knowledge that she could navigate similar situations safely in the future. Driving away, the streets seemed less intimidating than before. She felt a renewed sense of confidence and empowerment, aware that the encounter had strengthened her understanding of herself and her ability to respond effectively under pressure. The lessons of awareness, calm communication, and preparedness would guide her in all future challenges, reinforcing the value of being thoughtful, composed, and present. She continued home, carrying with her the quiet strength that comes from successfully navigating a moment of tension with grace and awareness. The night air felt lighter as she slid back into her car. The tension that had been pressing down on her shoulders for the past hour was slowly lifting, though her mind remained alert. She started the engine, keeping her eyes on the road, aware that even as the immediate encounter ended, the lessons from it would remain with her. She took a deep breath and reflected on what had just happened, realizing how much her training, awareness, and composure had shaped the outcome. As she drove through the quiet streets, she thought about how easily encounters like this could turn tense or even dangerous for anyone. She understood that her ability to remain calm and present had prevented what could have been a frightening situation. Each step she had taken, from keeping her hands visible to answering questions clearly, from controlling her breathing to maintaining confident posture, had contributed to the positive resolution. She realized that being prepared, both mentally and physically, was more powerful than any luck or chance. Her mind drifted to the people who might face similar situations without the benefit of preparation or training. She thought of the fear, uncertainty, and vulnerability they might experience. That thought strengthened her resolve to share the importance of awareness and self-protection. It wasn't about confrontation or aggression. It was about being equipped to handle the unexpected, to stay calm, and to act in a way that preserved safety and dignity. She reflected on the moments in the encounter where small choices had made a significant difference. Choosing to ask politely why she needed to step out of the car, keeping her hands visible, maintaining calm breathing, and carefully observing the officer's subtle cues. All of these had contributed to the outcome. Each decision had been deliberate, informed by her training, and guided by her intention to stay safe while respecting authority. The cumulative effect of these small, careful actions had turned a potentially stressful encounter into a manageable one. Driving further, she considered how the experience reinforced broader life lessons. Situations of tension, uncertainty, or stress are inevitable, but the way one responds defines the outcome. Preparation, patience, and awareness can transform moments of fear into opportunities for growth and empowerment. She realized that the encounter had strengthened not only her confidence but also her understanding of human interaction, communication, and personal responsibility. The streets were mostly empty now, the occasional passing car the only interruption to the quiet hum of her tires against the pavement. She felt a sense of calm settle over her, a calm rooted not in relief alone, but in the knowledge that she had handled the situation with skill and presence of mind. She thought about how awareness, preparation, and composure could influence not only personal safety but also the behavior of others. Her calmness had guided the officers toward understanding, reducing tension and preventing conflict. Her thoughts then turned inward, considering the deeper impact of the night's events. Beyond the immediate encounter, she had learned about the power of self-possession and resilience. Moments of tension test more than physical readiness. They test emotional strength, clarity of thought, and the ability to act deliberately under pressure. She felt a quiet pride in her ability to navigate these challenges, recognizing that her preparation had been invaluable. She recalled the looks of subtle acknowledgement from the officers, the slight softening in their tone, the measured nods. These details might have seemed minor, but to her, they were proof that thoughtful action, calm communication, and respectful composure could influence outcomes in meaningful ways. It reinforced her belief that self-protection is not just about defense but about presence, awareness, and effective interaction. As she continued driving, she thought about how to apply these lessons beyond this single encounter. Awareness, preparedness, and calmness were applicable in countless situations. At work, in public spaces, in interactions with strangers, or during personal challenges. The principles she had relied on tonight were tools for life. To navigate uncertainty, communicate effectively, and maintain control over her own responses. She understood that personal empowerment comes from preparation and thoughtful action, not from confrontation or force. Her reflections also included gratitude. She was grateful for the training she had received, for the hours spent preparing for situations she hoped never to encounter, and for the opportunity to apply that knowledge successfully. She was grateful for her own presence of mind, her ability to stay calm, and her capacity to navigate tense moments with dignity. Gratitude, she realized, was part of the process of maintaining balance and perspective in stressful encounters. The night continued to unfold around her, each street lamp casting pools of light on the pavement, each distant sound a reminder of the world beyond the encounter. She felt a renewed sense of confidence as she approached her neighborhood, knowing that she had handled the situation with care, awareness, and composure. The experience had left her stronger, more mindful, and more prepared for future challenges. Pulling into her driveway, she allowed herself a small moment of relief, though she remained aware of her surroundings. The encounter was over, but its lessons were enduring. She reflected on the importance of mental clarity, calm communication, and deliberate action in every aspect of life. Each decision, each response, had reinforced her understanding that preparedness is the key to navigating uncertainty safely and effectively. As she stepped out of her car and into the familiar safety of her home, she carried with her the quiet strength that comes from successfully facing a challenging moment. She knew that she could use this experience to help others understand the value of awareness, preparation, and composure. Sharing the lessons of her encounter could empower others to approach their own challenges with confidence and mindfulness, turning fear into understanding and uncertainty into clarity. She reflected on how ordinary life could suddenly present extraordinary challenges, and how important it was to be ready, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. Her training had provided the tools, and her experience had validated their importance. She felt a sense of empowerment, knowing that preparedness, awareness, and calmness were not abstract concepts but practical skills that could make a tangible difference in real situations. Settling into the comfort of her home, she allowed herself to relax fully for the first time since the encounter began. Yet her mind remained reflective, considering how the night's lessons could shape her actions in the future. She understood that preparedness, calmness, and awareness were not just for moments of tension. They were ways of approaching life itself, fostering resilience, confidence, and thoughtful interaction with the world around her. The experience had reinforced a profound truth. Strength comes not from aggression or force, but from clarity, composure, and careful, deliberate action. By maintaining presence, communicating effectively, and staying aware of her surroundings, she had navigated a potentially challenging encounter safely and respectfully. The impact of her actions extended beyond the immediate moment, demonstrating the power of preparedness, awareness, and inner strength. She thought about the countless others who might face unexpected or tense situations in their lives. Her experience, she realized, could serve as a reminder of the importance of training, awareness, and composure. She hoped that by sharing her story, she could inspire others to cultivate these skills, to approach challenges thoughtfully, and to act with confidence and clarity in moments of uncertainty. Finally, as she prepared to rest for the night, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The encounter had been resolved safely, and the lessons learned were invaluable. Awareness, calm communication, preparation, and mental clarity had guided her through the experience, proving their importance in real-world situations. She understood that these skills were lifelong tools, ones that would serve her well in countless future moments. She closed her eyes for a moment, reflecting on the night, the encounter, and the path she had taken. Each step had been deliberate, each decision informed by training and awareness, each response shaped by composure and presence. She felt a quiet pride and confidence, knowing that she had faced a challenging situation with dignity, intelligence, and courage. The night had tested her, but it had also strengthened her, leaving her more prepared, more aware, and more empowered for whatever challenges lay ahead.